All right, wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining who joined a bit early here. I'm going to go through a quick introduction before I hand it off for today's webinar. I am Carly Sapola. I'm the Director of Engagement for the American Solar Energy Society, and I'd like to thank you for joining us on our monthly webinar series. Before we get started, I'll just go ahead and go through a couple of updates on who and what ASES is and highlight some of our current events and programs. So the American Solar Energy Society, otherwise known as ASES, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were established in 1954 and advocate for sustainable living and 100% renewable energy by sharing information, events, and resources to cultivate community and power progress. You can join our community at any time at ases.org/join. Webinar registrants, such as yourselves, also receive a special 10% discount on all ASES memberships, excluding life, by using promo code webinar. So you can head to ases.org/join, or if you were a member and want to renew, you can also use the same promo code for 10% off by going to ases.org/renew. Also want to note that we will be having our 51st annual National Solar Conference, Solar 2022, Energy Transition with Economic Justice in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the University of New Mexico, June 21st to 24th this summer. We're accepting nominations for our annual ASES Awards. So please do check out the awards that we have and submit any nominations by February 15th at ases.org/awards. I also want to remind everyone of our other major program. The 2021 National Solar Tour is still online, and our virtual local solar tours and solar sites will be available to check out through January 15th. So just a few days left to do that if you still want to check those out. You can watch how and why people in your community made the choice to go solar. Also, mark your calendars for the 2022 National Solar Tour, which will be taking place the first weekend of October, October 1st and 2nd. You can get involved and learn more at nationalsolartour.org. I also want to invite you to participate in our online community. This is a space for our community to collaborate, share content and information, and network. We recently launched a newer forum called the Ask a Renewable Energy Expert Forum, where we have our technical division's experts on call to help answer your questions about anything solar or sustainability related. So be sure to hop online and start engaging at community.ases.org. And with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to my ASES updates. I want to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available in a recorded format soon. So I will follow up with everyone once it's available with a link to access the recorded version of today's webinar. And I want to ask you guys who are webinar registrants here and attendees on the webinar to submit your comments to the chat section and any questions to the Q&A section to help us differentiate between the two. We will review everything and answer all of the questions at the end of the presentation today. Now I'd like to introduce a few people for today's webinar. Today's speaker, Franz Hochstrasser, is CEO and co-founder of Raise Green, the climate action investment platform working to inclusively finance community-scale solar and sustainable assets. Franz is also CEO and co-founder of New Haven Community Solar, a small solar development company using crowd investing. He has been working at the intersection of policy, climate change, environmental, and social issues for more than a decade. Prior to graduating from Yale School of the Environment with a focus on sustainable finance, clean energy, and business in 2018, Franz served 8 years in the Obama administration. Franz served as senior advisor to the Special Envoy for Climate Change at the U.S. Department of State, working on the team that successfully negotiated the Paris Agreement. Prior to that, he was Deputy Associate Director at the White House Council of Environmental Quality, working on energy, environment, and climate policy and public engagement, and a confidential assistant and legislative analyst at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, working on conservation, energy, food security, science policy, and open data. He also worked on both of Barack Obama's successful presidential campaigns in 2008 and 2012. Franz holds a Master's of Environmental Management from Yale University, Bachelor's of Arts in Linguistics, and a Bachelor of Arts in Politics from the University of California, Santa Cruz. He sounds super awesome, so I'm really excited to hear more about Franz and what he's doing with Raise Green. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Stan Fishbein, today's moderator. Mr. Fishbein is managing partner at Cleanview Capital, an equipment finance company that specializes in providing commercial and industrial companies with traditional equipment lease financing for their acquisition of solar systems. With more than 40 years of diversified equipment leasing experience, Mr. Fishbein has held positions in the commercial equipment leasing subsidiaries of ABN AMRO Bank, Chrysler Corporation, Citibank, and Textron Corporation. He holds a Master of Laws degree in taxation from Boston University School of Law, a Juris Doctorate degree from Suffolk University Law School, and a degree in accounting from the University of Massachusetts. So with that, Stan, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Carly. Good afternoon, everyone. Franz Hochstrasser and his partners have created a climate action investment platform and aptly named it Raise Green. The company has taken what we know as crowdfunding to the securities markets, and in doing so, coined a new term, crowd investing. Using the security markets, Raise Green will raise funds from investors to inclusively finance community-scale solar and sustainable assets. We look forward to Franz explaining this new approach to financing solar projects and why it is an attractive alternative to other funding methods. Welcome, Franz. We look forward to your presentation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Stanley and Carly, for the fantastic introduction. And thank you, everyone, for spending some time today to join us. Big fan of what American Solar Energy Society does, and excited to share this alternative financing mechanism with you so that we can collectively expand the deployment of solar all across the country. So can you see my screen with the green slide here? All right, I'm seeing nods.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. So as Stan very rightly put, we at Raise Green exist to crowdfund investment into solar projects. And I will begin my presentation as not just the CEO, but also the Chief Compliance Officer of our company as a regulated entity with some disclosures. And that is to say that we are, nothing I will say here today is legal, financial, accounting, or investment advice, and we're not allowed to provide it. So please don't take it as such. And that's all the disclosure I'll share, but you can feel free to go back and refer to that slide if you'd like to read it. So really just want to cover the high notes today. One being, who is Raise Green? What are we doing? And how does it work? And then go through a few different example structures with you to share how we've seen it applied and how we've used it. But then ultimately the fun part is questions and discussion. So we'll be sure to leave ample time for that. So at a high level, Raise Green is a inclusive financing platform, or a climate action investment platform that is, in a technical parlance, a funding portal that is registered with the SEC and FINRA to conduct private exempt securities offerings. So what that means is that we can sell securities, debt or equity, to private investors, accredited or non-accredited. People can put in as little as $100 into a project, and they can own a piece of the clean energy future or the clean energy infrastructure. So we call that inclusive finance, and we allow everyone to invest in those projects through our online platform at raisegreen.com. It also gives solar developers and developers of other sustainable assets like energy efficiency the ability to set their own terms, and a flexible funding mechanism that's an alternative to the traditional bank financing models where you go to the bank, you fill out their form, and they give you a rate, and you either take it or leave it. In this case, with crowdfunding, because you're bringing the offering to the marketplace, get to set the terms and decide on how much interest to pay on your debt, or how much upside to allow for if you're selling equity. So this is an alternative financing approach, and we're very excited about it. Take a step back, though. What is crowdfunding at its base? So most of what has been done to date is actually considered donation-based crowdfunding. And that's stuff like Kickstarter or GoFundMe. You see people put up campaigns, and ultimately you are, in those cases, donating. And in the case of Kickstarter, sometimes you'll get a t-shirt or a water bottle, or if they're making a product, they'll give you that product if and when it gets done or built. And in 2012, under the Obama administration, the Jumpstart Our Businesses and Startups Act passed. And what that allowed for the first time in the US since the 1930s, really, with the Security Act and the Securities and Exchange Act back in the 30s, is for non-accredited investors, people making less than $200,000 a year or less than $1 million in net worth, to invest in private offerings, as long as they're done through registered funding portals that control and protect the investor against unmitigated risk. And so that's what we are at Raise Green. And that's the beauty of this approach, is it allows for people to invest from all different financial backgrounds and statuses. So what we're doing at Raise Green is applying that to project finance. And project finance is the traditional non-recourse financing that involves setting up a project entity to own and operate an asset, and then pay back the investors or the lenders over time through the cash flows that are generated from that asset. So we allow you to raise up to $5 million per company per year. Anyone can invest in those securities. And as I'll share, you can invest it, and you can offer any type of security as well. And what this does is it allows developers and project owners to really engage the crowd in an interesting way that builds community and also gives the opportunity for local wealth generation and ownership. So if you remember 3 things from this webinar, these would be it. One is that using regulation crowdfunding and Raise Green, you can be a term maker rather than a term taker. So if you're raising money, you can set the terms. You can share the upside of a project development with the community by allowing them to invest in it. And that may help with things like local opposition or NIMBYism, if you're getting that to a project. But also, with community development and wealth creation and retention. And thirdly is that you can diversify the capital stack of one of these projects in a really interesting way by adding this mechanism. So as I mentioned, you can offer any type of security through our marketplace. It can be equity that allows for somebody to come in and actually own a piece of the company that owns the project. And get paid back along with the other equity investors. You can offer debt for construction or term loans, which are traditionally done on commercial and industrial scale solar in the range of about 7 to 10 or 11% sometimes. And again, by setting your own terms, you can even beat those rates on Raise Green. But also you can refinance assets. So if you're working with a developer, or you are a developer and you have existing assets that you own, you may want to use Raise Green to take money out of those assets by selling debt to the crowd, and then use that money to build the next project. And so what we do in this whole process is that we are the intermediary. And so in so doing, we enable you to sell those securities through our SEC and FINRA registered funding portal. And we work with you to structure that offering in a way that's not just compliant, but also ideally attractive to the investors that you're trying to get onto your, to buy into your project. So we run proprietary financial models. We do a full compliance review, and we also will connect you with enterprise partners for things like banking, accounting, insurance, and even tax equity investors that can help you access the value of the investment tax credit, which can be a real big sticking point for a lot of community scale projects. We also help to market the raise. So once the raise goes live, after we've worked on all the offering documents, we have a social media campaign, and we have a blog and a podcast, as well as an event we call Investor Day, where investors can come and hear directly from those that are selling securities on the Raise Green marketplace. And then, of course, we actually help close out the offering by doing the settlement and following up with the investors with all the proper documentation. So that's the overview of what we do. And I'll give you a little bit of a taste now of kind of what we've done so that you can think about that in context. And then I really look forward to getting to a conversation with you all. So we've done about $2.1 million now raised through the marketplace for 10 different securities offerings since launching officially in July of 2020. And that has come from over 550 trades. So 550 investors. And our current list is about 7,000 subscribers to our newsletter and our blog. And the average investment size that we've seen from those trades is about $3,800. So it really is designed to be accessible to anyone. Some of these offerings have had their minimums as little as $100, and others have been a little bit higher, but we've worked with folks like National Energy Improvement Fund, Block Power, and the Connecticut Green Bank. And we've got some good press coverage along the way as well. So a couple case studies to kind of give you a more real world example of how this can be applied. One is Solaris Energy, which is a developer based out of Golden, Colorado. And they had a project called Elmley Renewable Energy. It existed, or it's already built and exists and operating. It's up in Vermont on the Putney School. And they raised $250,000 from 45 investors at a 4.25% 5-year debt note, so that they could take money out of that asset and go and use it to develop another one. So that's one example of how you can apply this. Another good example is the $1 million raise that we did with Block Power in the spring of 2021. Block Power created a subsidiary called the Block Power Energy Services 3 that was designed and set up to raise $1 million from crowdfunding, and then use that for a whole basket of energy efficiency upgrades to low to moderate income housing across New York State and in the Bay Area and Oakland, California. So they raised on a 5.5% debt note paid annually over a 12-year amortization. And then lastly, an equity offering that we did also in 2021 was with a company called Ola Filter. So this was not solar at all, but is a water filtration company that used Raise Green to finance their pre-seed round. They raised $165,000 from 75 investors, and they are currently in production and building their tap water filters and distributing them into Guatemala and Central America. So that's a little bit about what we do and what we've done. And it's very simple to get started. If you have a project that you're working on that needs financing, identify that project, come to us with some of the details through a welcome survey. we'll have have you fill out that intake form, and then we can set up a meeting and start to work on the project. And to give you a little bit more detail about how it works and how long it takes, once you sign the issuer agreement, which is really the contract that says we as Raise Green don't get paid unless your raise is successful, and we're going to work with you to make sure that we can make it as successful as possible so you can raise your target offering amount. Then we get into all the fun stuff. If you don't have your project company or the project company for the solar asset incorporated yet, we provide templatized and replicable project finance models. So you can use our templates to create your project company. We work with you to get the proper type of financial accounting represented into the offering statement, and then draft that offering statement, which is called a Form C. In this case, that statement gets filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which we do on your behalf. And in that goes all the things like the terms of the offering, as well as your financial statements, and gives us some time to prepare also to reach out to the community and to whomever might want to invest in it. So that leads up to the very exciting countdown to launch day. And this whole process can take anywhere from a couple weeks to 6 weeks or more, depending on how prepared you are as a owner of the asset or as the developer of the asset. The all exciting launch day is wonderful for everyone, because then we can finally talk publicly about your offering and share it with the world across all sorts of platforms, social media. You can talk to your friends and neighbors and drinking buddies about it if you drink, all sorts of outreach that you'll want to be doing to raise the money. We work right along with you all the way through. The raise has to be live for at least 21 days to give folks enough time to check it out. And we usually recommend having about a 30-day raise, just to ensure that there's enough time to get the word out and let people come in. So we've also found that most of the investments really come in the first week or in the last week of the raise. And no matter how many weeks are in between, it doesn't make a big difference. But once the offering's done, we then file all the necessary paperwork to close it out with the SEC on your behalf. And we work with you to get the money that you've raised dispersed out to you. And then, the money's yours. You can use it as you've specified in your use of proceeds, which we would work with you early on to flesh out. And then there is one reporting obligation at the end of the year. You have to report basically how you spent the money and how the company's doing 1 year after the raise. So that's a lot of detail. I want to make just a couple more points on how much it costs, because this is a big question that we usually get. And then I do want to open it up for questions rather than plowing forward too far into this. So basically, it depends on how much you're raising to understand how much it's likely to cost you to do it. And these are some of our estimates. These are just indicative, but hopefully they're useful for you to kind of gauge what's required in order to do a crowdfunding raise and to bring that capital to bear on local solar projects that you're either advocating for or developing directly. There are certain thresholds that the SEC has in place for disclosure. And if you're raising less than $250,000, you can self-certify your financials, which means you don't have to pay an accountant to look at them. You can do your own books and you can put them forward. We, of course, will look at them as the diligencing party here. But that's a nice thing about raising up to $250,000. You probably still do want to check with a lawyer about your document sets. We have our own lawyers, but As I said, this is not legal advice. So while we give you templates, we don't give you legal advice. And so that can be something you incur costs on. And then if you want to raise the money effectively, it is smart to set aside a little bit of money for marketing as well. So that's a piece of this. Now, I said Raise Green doesn't get paid unless your raise is successful, and we mean that. We take no money up front to sign an issuer agreement. We go through all of this work to prepare the offering statement with you and give you all of the legal templates that we've laboriously pulled together, basically on faith that you are going to be successful in your raise. And if you are, then we take a 5% success fee on the raise. And we also take 2% of the securities that are offered in the raise. So this is effectively your cost of capital for doing the business, or your closing fees, if you think about it that way. So that is who we are and what we do. And Stan, I'm happy to run through example structures if you'd like, but I do want to spend a good bit of time doing question and answer as well. So what do you prefer?
I think at this point, why don't you take a break and let some people ask questions before you do a deeper dive into structures, which may or may not be may not resonate with some of our people in the audience if they're more advocates than developers.
Cool. Yeah, let's go for it. All right.
Okay, I think you have some questions already
Yeah.
in the Q&A.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So groups like Community Loan Fund in New Hampshire and Clean Energy Credit Union with ASES offer savings and CDs to investors and loans out to energy investments, both at slightly below comparable rates. How is your program different? Or maybe advantages to this credit union, and which, you know, is in essence an intermediary, like all banks and credit unions. These are all intermediaries. They raise funds in various ways and then invest them or lend them out into projects. So how is Raise Green compared to credit union is the question.
It's a great question. Thank you for writing it up, Drew. It reminds me of this Congressional Research Service paper called Who Regulates Whom, which is a riveting read if you're ever looking for something to dive into as a soporific. But basically, I think that the difference between Raise Green and a community loan fund like the one you're referring to in New Hampshire and Clean Energy Credit Union is that they're regulated by different entities. So we're regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So we're that allows us to sell to non-accredited investors, and a credit union is often, I believe, regulated by the local city or the local state banking regulators. And then so, you know, the difference between investors in CDs and investors in a Raise Green security is that certificates of deposit, although they may pay very similar rates, they're just a different vehicle. So rather than buying a debt note or a security stake in a project finance company, you would be buying a certificate of deposit with that credit union. And then the loans that they give to energy companies, those are more akin to kind of the traditional financing approach of you as the developer going in, filling out paperwork, and then them saying, okay, we are willing to, based on your credit history, loan to you at this rate, take it or leave it. Whereas what we are doing is saying, let's go to the market, let's go to the crowd, and with a price, and let the crowd decide if they're willing to back you and make an impact investment to support your project coming into the world.
Very good answer. Carly, did you want to share a thought or two as well on that question?
Well, I guess not really. I think Franz did a good job answering it, but
Okay, great. So we'll go to Drew's next question. Isn't the overhead of dealing with these small investors a drag on systems, especially over multi-years?
Yeah, so Drew, I just put the paper in there. So um, so a drag on the system, it's a good question. So one, and actually I'll pull my slide deck back up because I do have a slide on this, and I think it's a great question because there is, you know, a transaction cost associated with managing, you know, hundreds of investors versus one credit union's billing department, for example, or loan repayment department. So let me pull this back up and share. So the exciting thing about crowdfunding is that it allows for you to basically have involvement from more people, and there is a cost associated with that, and so you got to weigh those costs and benefits as it relates to your desire to raise capital. And we feel like the benefits of public relations, of customer engagement, of you being able to set the terms and raise capital on a fairly short time window and enable community ownership and increase liquidity outweigh some of those investor management challenges. But you know, we're a startup, and we're building technology to make it easier and faster and better to use crowdfunding. And one of the things that we are planning to offer in the future is a kind of cap table management and investor relations capability. Right now, we have an enterprise partner that we can put you in touch with that enables you to do that in a fairly simple way already. So we do have resources that we connect you with to make it easier, but it's a great point.
So if I understand you correctly, Franz, you have a third-party provider who would do the ongoing investor relationship follow-up, reporting performance of the project, et cetera?
Yes, so we have a host of investor management services that you know are really up to the person issuing whether or not they want to use them. I can say, you know, from experience with New Haven Community Solar, when we paid our first dividend checks of 10% back in 2020, we actually hand wrote checks to 126 investors, and it did take some time, and it was you know, it was labor intensive, but it was also kind of fun because we got to put a little note in there that, you know, made people feel good about their investment, told them exactly how many you know, tons of carbon that our projects had reduced thanks to their investment. And so you know, it's a different way of doing things.
Okay, well, Drew has a couple other questions. We'll go through quickly. Is this considered interest income to investors? I think you already mentioned, Franz, that you have two types of offerings. You raise equity as well as debt. So if it was a debt offering, it would pay interest. If it was equity, it would be really not interest. It would be some sort of other income, capital gain or whatever, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah.
What percentage or fraction of applications go through? I mean, to define one transaction, are you sorting through 50, 100, 1,000? Give folks a little bit of a sense for what's involved in your normal day of looking at applications.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so because we're regulated, you know, our core responsibility as the marketplace is to do diligence on the offerings and ensure that we're protecting the investors from undue risk. And so in so doing, we screen projects very carefully. We have kind of a loosely modeled framework that we call RAISE. So we look for revenue, we look for ambition in the team about what they're doing and how much they want to reduce emissions and help their community. And then we look for impact that's both social and environmental. So we've screened now around 300 projects, and we've listed 10 securities offerings. So it's not to say that that you don't have a chance of getting through, but what we look for are solar projects that are raising capital. Ideally, they are already at NTP, notice to proceed, and they're ready to take financing to construct the asset. So that means they've already got a power purchase agreement or an offtake contract signed. They've already got a site lease figured out, and they've already hopefully made some progress toward permitting and interconnection. Although, at the end of the day, we look at the projects that come across our desk and we weigh, the different merits of doing a raise. So we would love to hear from you, even if your project is very early on, or if it's, right in that sweet spot.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. James Orenstein has a question. Do you have any examples of using a third-party partnership flip structure to monetize federal tax benefits for municipal facilities? I think that's one of the slides you have prepared. And maybe now's a good time to share that with the folks. At the rest of his question, I'll just read it quickly, and then you can share the slide. We are trying to offer free advice to a large city in the DFW Metroplex, Dallas-Fort Worth, that's averse to PPAs or other long-term financing and having a hard time cost justifying solar due to a low-cost 100% renewables energy contract they already have and are considering only the volumetric component of that rate as offset energy costs.
Awesome. Well, James, I know that I've seen your name before. I think we've engaged perhaps on previous webinars. So appreciate you coming here and tuning in and asking a great question. Yes, so we have done a tax equity partnership flip structure. And we did it actually on our pilot project, New Haven Community Solar. But it was not for a municipal facility. And so I don't have an example of that specifically. I have a number of folks who are working toward that and are trying to do that. We would, again, be more than happy to take a look at the projects that you're trying to bring to bear in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, and see if Raise Green might be an ample place to find financing for them. I'm not sure I'm fully clear on the volumetric component of the rate as an offset to energy costs, yeah, like I said, happy to dive into the details if you want to submit a project for consideration.
Yeah, and I'll follow up with all of you who are on as attendees with Franz's contact information, so you can contact Franz and talk through some details as well. And we've got another question in here from Robert Foster. Robert asked, and you kind of touched on this earlier, what kind of due diligence do you do on applicants and technologies?
Yeah, great question, Robert. Thank you as well for tuning in. So um, we have we have an internal kind of a screening process that we do, but um, basically the way I break down the diligence that we do is that there's kind of three main pieces of it. And it's the SEC requirements for a compliant filing. And those are all spelled out actually in the statutory regulation. And so we have to follow those to the letter in order to screen and prepare the filing memorandums. So call those the SEC requirements. And we go through and tick those off as part of our list. We then look also at the revenue side of things. So we run a proprietary financial model that we've built specifically for crowdfunding offerings, solar projects especially. And so we take your inputs and we run that through our model, and we figure out if we think there's a capability to repay the investors at the rates that you want to offer the terms. Because that's critical for any investment. And then the last piece really is the kind of ambition, impact, that's social and environmental. So we do look at what impact metrics you have. I mean, the biggest one for solar projects, of course, is greenhouse gas mitigation or renewable energy credits that can be created through adding this new generating asset to the grid. But then there's also, a kind of less tangible component to making sure that a project actually has meaning and impact in the community. So the social side of that, and that's more difficult to quantify. We feel as though by allowing anyone to invest in it, that there's a social benefit to that, simply by democratizing the capability of being able to come in and own a piece of the clean energy infrastructure. But if it's helping a housing cooperative, for example, to reduce their overhead, then that's great. If it's in marginalized communities and it's serving low to moderate income off-takers, that's even better. And so we do look at those kinds of things and take them very seriously, because we're purely mission driven as a business. Even though we are a for-profit entity, as an investment platform, we really do put that front and center in why we're doing what we're doing. Our belief is ultimately that it's not just whether we finance this transition to a clean energy economy, it's also how we do it that matters, and who we bring along, and we don't want to leave anyone behind in that process, and that's why we exist as a company.
I have a question. I'm not from the world of finance, so I was wondering if you could explain more about the debt notes and like how the debt like payback works. Like I think in one of the project examples that you had, there was like a debt. I'm just wondering how that works and all of that.
Well, sort of a lead into that, Carly, is James's follow-up question. And I will read it. I'm not sure if others are seeing it in the chat, but follow-up question: the volumetric charge, also true for large commercial customers, assumes 5 cents kilowatt hour total negotiated long-term rate, but volumetric charge per kWh used is only 3 cents a kWh, and rest is fixed or demand charges. So any savings through on-site generation is assumed to only save the 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So what he's saying is it's only the 3 cents that's offset, or savings is used to offset the payments on the paying back the financing. You can't include demand, the savings from demand, for instance, because there typically isn't any savings in demand. It's just the electric, the cost of the juice, as they say in the energy world.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that, James. And yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up the rate structure down in Dallas, and I mean that I think I'm preaching to the choir here that the fragmented 50-state nature of energy policy is sometimes maddening, but it really is determinative of how the economics on a given solar project break down, and so we're very sensitive to that, and that's why it's I think important to just take a look at any and all projects that are under development, because even though you may not fit the traditional mold of bank financing, and may not be able to get access to rates below double digits for certain projects based on what their lending algorithms are giving them and their loan officers. You may be able to convince a crowd of fervent supporters that your project should still exist, and so they should invest at a sub-market rate in order to support it, and you may find ample support out there for doing it. So Carly, you had asked about this debt structure and kind of how a debt note works, and so I'm happy to dive in a little bit to that. And this actually is an example of a corporate structure that we have financed on Raised Green. So this is our first order, call it the first work stream that we support. And we are super excited because in a little over a month's time, we're going to be releasing our software as a service, which is a TurboTax for project finance. We put out a beta on it a year or so ago and got some great responses, and used all those learnings to further develop the product that we're releasing in February. But it's really a guided journey to help a developer go through the process of getting all the documents that they need and inputting the data and auto-generating documentation for the legal side of setting up their asset, their project company, and then also the financial side of creating a Form C and being able to list it. So that's a bit of an aside, but all to say that this structure will be supported by that software. And the way that this works is effectively, if you're a developer already, or developers that have holding companies, they're going to have their own balance sheet. They're going to have other projects that they've financed over the years, ideally, and they're going to use some of that sponsor capital, probably, or sponsor equity, to spin off and create a project company, and then they're going to need debt to support and lever that equity. And so we can come in as, or we as Raised Green can support that developer to raise the debt from the crowd and leverage the equity investment that they're making in the project company. And so, they can price that at whatever rate that we arrive at. We have, I should have said a few things about our team. We also have our Chief Investment Officer, Jackie Logan, on the team, who has been structuring bond offerings for 20 plus years in capital markets. So she is very experienced in this and has thankfully come to help us out as Raised Green. Most recently, she was at Goldman Sachs. And so she's applied her powerful experience to helping us sort through these types of offerings and structure debt at a rate that is uh, I have to be careful what I say because I don't want to provide any investment advice, but at an appropriate rate, call it. And so the way it works, very simply, super long answer to your question, Carly, but is that you put down, call it $100. If the note is a 5% note, then you get paid back 5% annually, or quarterly, depending on what the amortization schedule is. And so at the end of the term, or the maturity of that note, you get $105 for what you invested.
Okay.
So that's the gist of how it works.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Drew, another question. Right.
Okay. Drew is saying, what I see is better return for investor and lower loan or equity rate for the applicant. Is that a correct understanding?
So it absolutely can be the case. Yes. Better return than what is a good question. I don't know what you would be comparing it to, but the return profiles vary by securities offering, and depending on what those rates are set at, it may indeed be cost competitive or a better rate of return than the alternative. And maybe using a couple examples to make the point. So this is a 5-year debt note that the Solaris folks sold. They sold it at a 4.25% interest rate over 5 years. So you could compare that, for example, to a 5-year Treasury rate. Obviously, there's more risk involved, but it is already a generating asset, and so it's less risk than a asset that hasn't been built. And I don't want to quantify the risk, but because I can't. But that's kind of one way to think about it, is to look at it, against other bond offerings, and then yeah, definitely there is the possibility that somebody setting up one of these offerings could get a lower interest rate if it's debt, or a lower equity rate if it's equity. What we've seen also in the market is that sponsor equity to raise that first in money into your project company can be anywhere from 15 to 25% or higher that the investors kind of demand as and so if you're raising sponsor equity on a project that that you can get fairly far along, we can definitely talk about how you can get a lower rate on that.
Well, rate would also be determined by the dollar amount of the project or the offering, I would assume. So refresh everyone again, Franz, of what's your minimum and maximum size transactions that Raise Green gets involved with?
Yeah, great. Thanks for bringing that back, Stanley. So the basic thresholds that we operate under are the regulation crowdfunding thresholds, and it generally doesn't make economic sense to use Raise Green to raise money if you're trying to raise less than $10,000, and even up to about $50,000. It's kind of a toss up. You could come to us and say, yeah, I've got a small project, I want to raise 40 grand, and we'll talk about that and see if it makes sense. It very well may, but you can raise up to $5 million per company per year. So the way that we really envision this thing growing and becoming a much more useful tool over the years is that a given developer can come back and raise $5 million each year for a successive batch of projects or a couple of projects that they're doing. So it's really geared towards that, long tail journeyman developer that wants to get into the business, wants to build a company over the next 5 years, where we have to add a massive amount of clean energy to the grid. And so, 70% of commercial buildings in the US could have solar. Only 3.5% of them do right now. And that's because it's really difficult to structure these projects and to get capital for them. We want to see that happen much more quickly and with a lot more inclusive and equitable capital stacks.
Okay, Sherry asks a very good question. Does this work in a state that doesn't permit third-party financing? And the reason why it's a good question, Franz, is because a lot of your presentation today is talking about raising funds, financing developers, folks that want to build to own a solar system, let's say, and sell the power on a PPA. And I think what Sherry is alluding to is there are certain states that do not allow PPAs, these so-called third-party financings is what she's referring to. So maybe you could talk a minute about the availability of your funding platform for directly financing a company or a municipality that wants to, let's say, own the solar system and is looking for, an attractive financing alternative to what might otherwise be in the marketplace and be available to them. At the same time, answering her question about third party.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Sherry. And if you are raising equity for a project, the answer is unfortunately, and you're in a state that doesn't allow third-party financing, the answer is unfortunately no. And we'd love for that to change. I think this is a big point of advocacy that I'm sure that you all have taken up across the country in various chapters. But if you are raising debt, then we absolutely can help.
I think if I could elaborate on that, third-party financing to me is where a developer who owns and operates the system is selling the power to a customer, be it a municipal, non-for-profit, CNI, it doesn't matter. What they're really doing is selling power. And that's why these states and utilities are pushing back against these so-called third-party programs. But that's a misnomer because there are PPAs where they're selling power. There are leases where, in essence, they're selling power, and those are not liked just the same as PPAs. But if you're talking about a different type of lease where you're not selling power in a disguised fashion or a loan, then there is no prohibition in those states. So again, you have to dig a little bit deeper because just the name third-party programs disallowed sort of misses the mark. At least that's been our experience at Cleanview Capital.
Yeah, it's a great clarification of the nuance, Stanley. I think you're spot on, of course. And yeah, I mean, there have been folks doing lease structures down in Florida where it's not expressly permitted, but to do third-party financing. But yeah, so there are ways to do it. It's complicated, and if you figured it out, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, it's a different type of lease is really the short answer. I mean, North Carolina doesn't allow so-called third-party financing, but with a traditional equipment lease, that is something that works in North Carolina. So again, it's, the devil is in the details, and you can't just go by, these broad names like no third-party financing allowed.
Well, I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions that have been sent in. And I want to thank Franz for your great presentation and the great work that you're doing, and Stan for joining us as moderator today. I've really, really enjoyed today's webinar. So thank you both so much.
Thank you, Carly. Thank ASES for sponsoring today's webinar, and Franz, excellent presentation. You've certainly given people a lot to think about, not only on the origination side, but on the investing side. And if someone in the audience is interested in investing in one of your offerings, how best for them to monitor upcoming offerings that you may be issuing.
Yeah, and thank you both, Carly and Stanley, so much for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for the great questions. If you're interested in investing, please do check out invest.raisegreen.com, or you can find your way there through raisegreen.com and just click on the big blue button on the homepage, which is Invest Now. And we do have a couple offerings live right now that may very well be of interest. So thank you so much for the time and attention, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll give a shout out to Wilden. Thank you, Wilden, for helping us find Franz and get this webinar put together from the technical divisions within the American Solar Energy Society. So again, thank you everyone who joined us. Thank you so much, Franz and Stan. I'll follow up with the recorded version of this webinar and some other information. So thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Carly.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.